Hey guys, you're listening to the We Could Make That podcast, and I'm your host, Andrea Ween. On this show, I interview small batch, independent food makers who've struck out on a noble cause, making the world as tasty as possible. In each episode, I'm digging into their backgrounds, motivations, and passions to decode why and how they started their businesses, and the lessons we can each take back to our own kitchens and lives. Let's get started. Today I'm talking to Hansen Shieh. Hansen's the founder of One Culture Foods, a new sauce company that's aiming to bring the bold, complex, beautiful Asian flavors of Hansen's childhood to the American palate. In this episode, we talk about everything from how the company came to be, why it's important to try everything twice, and Hansen's focus on what makes us all the same versus what makes us different. He also divulges his guilty food pleasure and what Taiwanese food will likely never take hold stateside. Hansen, how are you? Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. So let's talk a bit about One Culture Foods. Tell me what it is to start.
Yeah, so One Culture Foods is a food brand that I started about a year ago. I started working on it probably a year before that. And the whole inspiration behind the brand and the products themselves is really kind of my childhood and growing up in the San Gabriel Valley of LA, which I'm not sure how familiar with you are, but it's really renowned for their regional Asian food, namely their regional Chinese food. And I grew up with my Taiwanese grandmother in the household, so really like learning from her in the kitchen and really developing, this passion for like big, bold, beautiful, in-your-face flavors that is, a trademark of a lot of the cuisines out in the East. And so I really wanted it to kind of make it as easy as possible for others to kind of develop this relationship with these awesome flavors as well that I really, really love, and, provide a high quality, convenient vehicle to make it as easy as possible for people to bring these flavors into the home kitchen and kind of broaden their exposure. Because like if you kind of break them down to their like elemental flavor profiles and what they deliver, like, there's some of the most beautifully complex flavors in the world. It's just that, with like for example, like fish sauce or cumin or Chinese fermented black bean, like they have so many like kind of nuances and layers to them, but there's kind of this like intimidating stigma around them, where people aren't sure how much to use, people aren't sure what they're going to taste like. In some instances, like a fish sauce, if you're in your first experience with it, if you go overboard and you OD on fish sauce, like that's going to traumatize you for a while. So it's really important show people the proper way to kind of balance them and use them. And so that's kind of what we try to do. We try to do 95% of the work for people and make it as easy as possible for them to bring these already like meticulously balanced flavor profiles into their home kitchens, and so that they can kind of do with it what they will and apply it to their regular rotation of recipes to kind of add a nice little midweek twist, or perhaps it inspires them to kind of be a little more adventurous and go and look at recipe inspirations on our website or the suggested uses on the back of our packaging and kind of like broaden their horizons and like be a little bit experimental. So that's kind of what we try to do. It's really like paying as much respect and transparency to the products themselves and where they come from and what they are, and not like masking them with a ton of added sugar or additional salt or all this other crazy nonsense, but kind of like just building a complementary flavor profile around them, so then allowing them and their inherent kind of awesomeness to shine.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, you mentioned ODing on fish sauce, and that's such a funny thing because I feel like, oftentimes when people start cooking with these ingredients, and I'm specifically thinking my brother-in-law came to Sydney when Matt and I were living there, and we took him to Little Vietnam, and he walked into the restaurant and just got hit in the face with like the smell of fish sauce. And like, you know, for me and Matt, we're like, oh, it's whatever, you know, I like fish sauce, it's all good. He had to like leave the restaurant. He couldn't even stay. So I think people, when they're not used to those types of flavors, they can be a little intimidating. So that's what I love about what you're doing, is just really kind of making it very simple, very approachable, but yet getting people out of their comfort zones just enough to get them to fall in love with it.
Yeah, yeah. I remember my first experience with Sichuan peppercorns. I was like maybe 8. And I was with my mom, and we just went to one of these super nondescript hole-in-the-wall noodle shops that were literally on every single corner and every single strip mall in the area that I grew up in. And already had, you know, an affinity for spicy foods. And so she kind of slid this bowl of like super red noodle soup in front of me, and I was all about it, not knowing that, you know, it was a Sichuan noodle, not even knowing what Sichuan peppercorns and what they were all about. And so I started just like slurping it down, and all of a sudden like my mouth is just like on fire, just like not in a super spicy way, but it's like buzzing, like non-controllably buzzing. And I was like, what is going on? I was super, like, as an 8-year-old having this like sensation in my mouth for the first time. I was so confused and so scared. And my mom, like, literally, like, just across the room, across the table, just like laughing at me, like hazing me, like I was a pledge in her frat. It was pretty funny.
I love it. Your mom is my new favorite person. Yeah, we grew. So it's funny. Matt and I just bought. We've been growing herbs and things like out on the balcony, and we just bought jalapeno plant. We were so excited about it, and then it started budding, and the chilies started forming, and we kept looking at it. We're like, these don't look like jalapenos. And then all of a sudden, they just started turning red, like before they got big enough to be jalapeno size. And we're like, oh no.
You're like, uh-oh.
We had bought, they're Thai chilies. They're like bird's eye chilies. And so the other day I brought a green one and then a red one, and I'm like, let's just try them. Like maybe they're, you know, not so spicy. And Matt I put one like piece of it on my tongue. Matt took a piece of the red one, and I immediately spit it out. Like the second it hit my mouth, it was so hot. And he ate his, and then was eating ice cream out of the gallon, because it was just so intense. So we'll be having hot sauce for everyone for Christmas. Anyone who's listening to this, you're getting hot sauce for Christmas. Is the moral of the story.
Nice.
So you mentioned cooking. Your grandmother lived with you or was around a lot when you were a kid. So take me back to being in the kitchen with her, and what did that look like? I mean, what was your comfort food as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of super kind of simple peasant dishes. Like I remember for breakfast, a lot of the times we would have tomato and eggs, and it's literally just like kind of like scrambled eggs that's cooked in, you know, very roughly chopped tomatoes, and they, you know, are in the pan for not more than 5-7 minutes, marry a little bit, and you just eat that, you know, over a little bit of rice, and it's like the simplest, maybe 3 ingredients, including, you know, salt, and it was like the most comforting, warming thing ever. We had, you know, a lot of Chinese chicken noodle soup was like a go-to, and I feel like this kind of transcends just this cuisine and this culture into like all cultures around the world, of like that one go-to, like hot, you know, brothy remedy whenever you're not feeling good. So like a super like delicious herby and herbal Chinese chicken noodle soup is something that we had kind of on the stovetop all the time.
And what makes it Chinese? I'm curious. What makes it? What are the ingredients that are different?
Yeah, so they add ginseng. You know, there's definitely a healthy dose of ginger. They'll add jujubes, not the candy jujubes, but like I don't even know what they are really, but these like they're red little balls. I think they're maybe in the berry family, maybe in the date family. They added a nice kind of nuanced sweetness, but I'd say in general the difference is just like an herbal quality to it that made it feel that much healthier and more like fortifying.
Yeah, a little bit more medicinal.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were growing up, obviously food was around and kind of a big part of your upbringing, but did you ever think that you would work in food?
Um, it's a good question. I feel like I always had this weird fascination and affection for food. And I remember my mom, I would sit there and instead of watching cartoons, instead of watching like Saved by the Bell reruns, like I'd be watching the Food Network the entire afternoon, especially in the summer. Or when I probably should have been outside playing or something. But I just like sit there for hours on end and watch the Food Network. And that was in like the heyday of the Food Network in like I want to say, the mid to late 90s, where there's a lot more of the kind of in the kitchen, pour and stir in front of the camera type shows, where it'd be like, Mario Batali's, show and Bobby Flay and Sarah
Emerald.
Moulton.
Yeah.
Yeah, like two hot tamales, which I loved. Obviously, Wolfgang was there. Emerald, of course. So like that was like it was just like the personality and the engagement and like I don't know the way that they were able to kind of weave in stories and narrative through their food and just seeing how people reacted to the food. It was just so fascinating for me, and I didn't know why really because even at the time, I would spend time with my grandmother and my mom in the kitchen, but I wasn't doing, that much cooking myself. I was just kind of hanging out and observing, and I just like kind of loved being around it all the time. And so it wasn't until kind of later in my high school years, and especially in college when I didn't have my mom and my grandmother to cook for me, that I started to really, really experiment in the kitchen and really kind of get into food and really like consume food across kind of all different outlets, right? Because I started reading a lot more about food. Obviously, was continuing to watch a lot of kind of food content on TV and starting online, and just having a lot of food experiences going out. And I grew up. I mean, I went to college in Berkeley, and so obviously a lot of great food around in the Bay Area. And that was the point where like, all right, like this is something that like I'm super into, and I kind of felt like that's when the seed was planted. And as the years went on, it kind of just made more and more sense. And I always found myself continually like daydreaming, about different things, food related and like different concepts and different possibilities. And I've always kind of been that way of just like following your gut type of guy, before getting into food. And I'd say my first job was a kind of a same pursuit of just following a passion. And while I was at Berkeley and afterwards, I worked for the Raiders, the Oakland Raiders in the NFL as a scout because I love football, played football in my life, wanted to be a general manager, and kind of chase that. And so I've kind of always been that way. Like there's like an analytical side to me, definitely, but first and foremost, is kind of like just trusting my gut and like going after kind of what I'm super into and what I'm super passionate about. And I feel like there should be enough like crossover there where, you're able to kind of like, if you're creative enough or you're just like, thinking or working hard enough, you'll be able to find that sweet spot, where you're able to kind of satisfy that natural curiosity in something, in a subject that you are actually really into, and also are able to make a career out of it. And so in between the football thing and in between starting One Culture Foods, I dabbled in a couple different things. But I kind of, to answer your question, I kind of always knew that I would end up in something that I was like super into and super passionate about. And food is definitely at the top of that list.
Do you see any similarities between working with the Raiders? And I'm a Cleveland fan, by the way, so we don't like you guys very much. But are there any similarities between what you were doing in your first job and what you're doing now?
Fascinating question. I've never gotten that before. I would say there is a lot of learning by watching and then learning by doing, definitely. And I don't know if that's more a answer to like the commonalities between what I was doing at the Raiders and just starting my own business in general, or if it's like food specific. But it's a lot of like observing and internalizing and like breaking things down as kind of analytically as possible, but also like knowing that like you're going to be wrong half of the time, right? That's the thing about talent evaluation in the NFL and across kind of all sports. It's like the best scouts in the world are going to be wrong half of the time, right?
Mm.
And so there's so many uncontrollable variables out there. So it's really about focusing on, what you can control and not expending counterproductive energy towards the things that you can't control. And I find, that has been super, super valuable for me as a first time entrepreneur of just, learning trial by fire, kind of learning as I go and just like figuring out, all right, these are the things that I have control over and I should be focusing on. And there's a million things out there that I just can't emotionally worry about right now because there's so much to tackle.
Yeah. What have been some of those things that have been the things that you thought maybe starting out that would be a little bit more controllable that you've had to let go of a bit?
Mm, a lot.
You're like every day.
Yeah, every day. I'd say so there are like a few really, really big lessons, and I'm learning new lessons every single day. I'm still, super new to this. But there are like, have been some in this first year or so, been really, really valuable lessons that once I figured them out, they've kind of allowed me to kind of put them aside. And like the first one would be to one, kind of going back to what I alluded to earlier, just like worrying about what I can control, not worrying about what I can't control. Not getting too high, not getting too low, just kind of staying present, kind of staying mindful, and like kind of separating the cognitive from the emotional. Just like, obviously you have to be, strategic and think ahead. But if you're, constantly thinking about all of the stuff that still needs to be done and how much further you need to go and comparing yourself to all the other successful brands that you see out there and all the other food entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general that you read about and that you meet through this process, like that stuff starts to build up, right? That stuff's super daunting, right? So like not even just kind of acknowledging and kind of putting aside and not allowing that to affect you emotionally, I think that's been a big one. Another one is just like being comfortable with never really knowing what you're doing.
That's a hard one for me too. It's always a struggle.
It's like if you have to like know exactly how to do something before you take that first step, then it's just paralysis by analysis, right? You're never going to take that first step as an entrepreneur, at least, because quite candidly, like you never know what you're doing. Not only do you like never really know what you're doing and you're kind of figuring out as you go along, but even towards the end or even looking back, you're never going to know definitively that that was the right choice, right? I guess, and that kind of parlays into the next one is like, you never know if you're making the right or the best decision or not, so don't even worry about it, right? Like inform yourself and like try to make as educated of a decision as possible. But once you commit to something, go and like execute and don't worry about all the other woulda, coulda, shouldas, because that's super counterproductive.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And it's a tough one to remember because I think it's just human nature almost to second guess and wonder if we're making the right decision. But as soon as you hesitate, that's where the problems start to creep in. So completely agree with you.
Yeah, and it's an ongoing battle, but it's like, I experienced it this morning where like I was kind of in a pretty tough negotiation and I walked out of it and I can tell, I wasn't kind of at peace with it and I couldn't figure out why, right? And like I could have allowed that kind of to continually affect me, but I had to kind of take a step back and like before even starting to tackle the rest of my to-do list, just kind of like thinking back and figuring out and like distilling exactly kind of where that emotion was coming from and then just putting it aside. Like, okay, that's probably where that, discomfort comes from. And there's nothing I could have done about that. So be it, put it aside and then just move forward. And like taking that step back, that really, really helps me.
Let's take a step back in the story as well. So when you said about a year ago is when you started to work on everything, but what was the process leading up to this? Was it to fulfill a need because you were looking for something, looking for some of those flavors of maybe your childhood and your hometown that you couldn't find? Or what was the ideation process like getting to where you are now?
Yeah. So I was in an industry and a job that I wasn't super happy with. I was in finance, which I feel like is a common tale, and I knew that I wasn't happy in it. I kind of definitely wanted to switch into something that I enjoyed, and I come from a family of entrepreneurs, so I kind of felt like, as crazy as that the idea of starting your own business might be to some people, it didn't seem kind of that wild of an idea, just because I've been around it my entire life. So it didn't seem that foreign to me. So looked at a couple different concepts or ideas, talked to a couple of different people, and kind of like put pen to paper on some things, and then how I ultimately came to what has become One Culture Foods was triggered by a friend that was staying with me for the weekend. It's funny because now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever really told this story to anyone.
I love that. Perfect.
But like, I guess this really, really was like the initial seed that was planted, and it probably the idea that I had coming out of that weekend probably has nothing to do with what eventually manifested. But it was a friend who was staying with me, and she opened my fridge. She looked around my kitchen. She's like, "You have so many sauces everywhere," and I was like, and there's like literally, I never really like paid attention to it, but I looked around, like, yeah, my countertops, my entire fridge is like full of condiments and sauces everywhere, and they're all like, and I'm sure a lot of people have the same experience where, like, you get things, and either you get them for a specific recipe, or they catch your eye on the aisle, in the aisle, and you use it once, you use it twice, you use like 20% of it, and it kind of like just goes on the countertop or into the pantry, and like you don't use it again forever, and so like you just start accumulating a bunch of bottles everywhere. And so I was like, yeah, I mean, I do have a ton of sauces everywhere, and like I'm someone who cooks relatively often, and I was like, there has to be a better solution, there has to be a better way, right? And so I was thinking about, like, why do I have all these different condiments and sauces? And it's because the Asian pantry is so complex, and there's so many different products out there, and all the dishes require like anywhere from like 5 to 10 to like 15 different inputs to create this really, really nice kind of full flavor profile that you tend to get out at restaurants, and they you try to recreate at home. And so I was like, there has to be something better out there. And so I started to kind of pay more attention, and I realized, like, there are the teriyakis out there, there are like the sweet Thai chilies, and there are the peanut sauces, but there wasn't anyone really pushing the boundaries and doing anything super sexy or exciting in that space. And there wasn't anyone really like bringing like more kind of nuanced, next level Asian flavors into the discussion, or trying to introduce them into like the broader consumer consciousness, into the natural space. And they were all kind of either you have to go into Chinatown and go and like into that super obscure ethnic market and try to find that one label that you can't really read, but you saw in a magazine somewhere and you have a picture of on your phone, and you're trying to like match up, or you're relegated to going to your Whole Foods or your other more conventional grocery store and settling for the same old teriyaki. And so like that seed was kind of planted in my head, and I'd always noticed past as far as like 5-10 years of this kind of more interest and more exposure into real Asian flavors, just like kind of next level, more nuanced Asian flavors, whether it be in all of the more traditional publications of the Civil War and the Bon Appetit, of dedicating more features to different food trips, going out into like Southeast Asia, going out into Tokyo, going out to Seoul, or even in the recipes themselves, of just highlighting and using more Asian ingredients, as well as the influence of like the kind of chefy restaurant world of a lot of new American, ostensibly Italian or French restaurants starting to utilize and really highlight on the menu things like gochujang and togarashi, and miso, obviously, and wasabi. And so you started to see the exposure of these ingredients and these flavors start to grow and grow. And so I felt like there was an opportunity to really like make something, create something that allowed these flavors and allowed these ingredients that like work so well in the restaurant space, or people get really excited about when they get takeout, or they go into Chinatown markets to seek out, and create something that was super convenient and high quality and natural and non-GMO, and kind of reframe them so that they're a little more approachable and a little more accessible. And it's all about kind of pushing them up the convenience spectrum, if you will, and making it, that much more easy to consume, and that much more easy to kind of wrap your head around. And so that kind of it took a while for that to kind of evolve and kind of crystallize into exactly kind of what I wanted to do, and what I like wanted our point of view to be, and it's still an ongoing process. But all I wanted to do, like at the very, very core of it, is like just make really, really delicious products and highlight these really, really awesome ingredients that like I grew up with and I think are some of the best ingredients in the world. It's just that they haven't had a chance to really kind of resonate with the broader audience, because there's that kind of intimidation factor, or because like people aren't sure how to use them. And so it's all about just kind of making it, kind of tearing down those walls and those barriers to entry, kind of making it as easy and digestible as possible is what we're trying to do.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I think that's such an awesome mission, because I think so many times it's not only just an entrance into those flavors, but as soon as people can understand those flavors and start to wrap their heads around it, then it opens the door to the culture side of it too, right?
Yeah.
And it's obviously built into your company name, that whole aspect of understanding someone or something that might be different than what you've known from just walking through your grocery store or walking through your community. I love that there's both elements of that.
Yeah. And I think it's about focusing on the commonalities, right? Focusing on kind of what we all share, what we all relate to. And I think, food along with, music and dance, like these are all universal languages, right? That you could go across the world and not speak the same language whatsoever, not really have those traditional means of communication. But someone starts playing an instrument, or someone like smiles and starts dancing, or someone like offers someone else a delicious like hot plate of food. Like those are all things that we can all relate to. And I think, food is one of the most effective ones, because that really like it conjures so many memories. It's so like comforting. Right? It's something that like is at its core, something like that is satiates us and like keeps us, alive, but also something that like people put a lot of art and craft and love into. And you could really, really like understand, or at least start to understand better, kind of the history or the story of someone's family or someone's culture, just through the food that they eat, or through how they look at their food system, or how they grow their food and how they process their food and what flavors they love. So I think it's awesome. I think it's just like it's so universal, and it's so telling, and it's so like compelling. And I think it's something that like we all get. It's something that like, there's so many reasons, why we could point to like why we're different, why it's, us versus them. But, I think food's one of those foundational things where like we could all really, really like rally around and love. And so that's what it means to me, at least.
That's what it means to me too. And people often say, why do you travel? I was on a podcast actually yesterday, and they were asking me this question, why do you travel? And people sometimes think it's not a good answer to say food, but I feel like you can tell so much about a place by what their regional cuisine is, and you can learn so much by what's on your fork. And so it's such an entry point into someone else's life, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's kind of this great equalizer, the same way a smile is, or the same. If you can share a plate of food, there's something really powerful in that.
Super, super powerful.
Tell me the story of how you came up with the name then. I mean, we're kind of touching on it. I feel like we're dancing around it, but give me the nitty-gritty of how you actually got that name.
One Culture Foods. How did I come up with the name? It was, it wasn't this, it wasn't this super thought out exploration. I didn't like write a million names on the wall. I didn't like, I don't know, I didn't like poll a ton of my friends. I just kind of like thought about what I wanted to create and what I wanted it to be about. And I wanted it to be like, really inclusive. I didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves into, one region of the world. I wanted it to really also be kind of vague enough so that people could have their own interpretation of it, but also at least give enough of a direction in that, it's all about just like one universal human culture, right? It's all about just like us kind of going back to focusing on what makes us the same versus what makes us different. And I think there's just so much energy and so much conversation around what makes us different, that I think, it's a really, really important to highlight those tangents, those things that like we all can relate to and that resonates with all of us. And so I don't know. I mean, One Culture Foods, I think it's just hit me one day. I was like, that sounds good enough. And it wasn't taken. And it was like it was vague and broad enough where like it still gave me enough wiggle room to really kind of figure out exactly who we were and still try to figure out exactly who we are, because I think it's continually evolving. But I think it had enough of the cues to provide kind of this umbrella, this platform for us to build who we are. And really, it's all about just like inclusiveness. I guess that's at its core. It's what it is.
What do you think is the most rewarding thing that's happened to you since starting the company?
Most rewarding thing. There are a lot. I think, if I'm being like completely honest, is like getting those moments where I know I'm really close to my mom, and my mom's been a huge influence on me. And just like those moments where like I can tell she's proud of me. Those are cool. Those are very cool.
Yeah. What was her reaction when you said, "I'm going to start this company"?
She thought I was crazy. I mean, I think everyone thought I was crazy for multiple reasons. I mean, it's also really hard for them, or for like kind of that generation of immigrants who, my mom was an entrepreneur out of necessity, right? Like she came to this country, didn't know how to speak the language really, had a certain set of skills, but wasn't able to articulate that because she didn't have a grasp of the language. And so she really had no choice but to take the risk of starting her own business and applying those skills and doing her own thing.
What was she doing?
They still run. They started and still run. They do a promotional products business. So they're like an importer and distributor of promotional products. So like anything that like a pen or portfolio or any type of desktop item or tchotchke that has a logo on it that isn't intended to be sold. That's what they do. So they leveraged their relationships out east with manufacturers, and they were able to import goods and figure out how to different methods of engraving and imprinting, adding value to the goods, and then carving out a nice little business for themselves. But going back to the question of like how she reacted, it's like to them, the only reason they started a business is because they had no choice, right? So the idea of, and my brother's an entrepreneur as well, but the idea of us choosing to take on all this risk and choosing to go through just the struggle of just starting your own thing and being an entrepreneur, like it baffles them. And so it was hard for her to kind of wrap her head around it, especially because I was in finance. I was making a decent salary, enough to support myself, and she was like, "You're just gonna give that all up to make sauces?" And I'm like, "Yep." But now that we've gained some really strong traction, at least to start, and all the arrows are pointing up and to the right, and things look good. I think it's been one of those things where she was definitely to go back to like a sports metaphor. It's like that 30-foot three-pointer that like the coach is like, no, what are you doing? And then it goes in, like, okay, good shot.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so now it's like having those conversations, and like having those conversations instead of mother to son, which we still have obviously, but more like kind of entrepreneur to entrepreneur, being able to relate on that level. That's been super cool, because we haven't been able to do that before. So I think, although if you were to have her on your podcast, which would be super, super entertaining, she she would never admit it. But like kind of having those conversations and like kind of hearing or sensing those little glimmers of pride, those are nice. Those are what I live for.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's next for you guys?
A lot of exciting stuff. We're continually improving the sauces. We're actually going through a kind of a brand redesign right now. I've up until this point, I've bootstrapped the entire thing. It's only been me. I say we just because saying I all the time makes me feel very uncomfortable. But it has been just myself up until this point, just kind of willing it along. But now that we have proved the concept, and now that we have had some traction, we just closed a seed round, so we actually have some kind of money to put to work. So we're going to start building out a team, going through kind of a redesign process, more aggressively approaching distribution, and then most excitedly, and this one I'm going to keep under wraps, most excitedly, we're starting the R&D process of our next line of products that I'm super, super, super excited about.
Cool. I can't wait to see what they are.
Yeah.
So I know we're coming up on time. I have a few just kind of quick fire questions to end it. There's some fun ones if you're up for it.
Yeah.
All right. What is your ideal meal?
My ideal meal. Ooh. And I could only have one?
Yeah, one meal. This isn't like the prison one where you get to try like everything for one. Yeah.
It would probably be just like a perfectly roasted chicken.
Okay, simplicity.
Probably,
I like it.
yeah, super, super perfectly roasted chicken with a really, really nice crispy skin and super moist meat, and like maybe like a side. Do I get a side?
Yeah, you can have a side. You can have a side. Yeah, meal. It's not just one
Nice,
item, so you
nice.
can have, a few things.
Nice. Some like rosemary, potatoes on the side. Some nice roasted chicken. Probably a green. Probably some type of green there. But yeah, that's probably it. I don't think there's like any like more like simple joy than just like an awesome roasted chicken.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's so good. What is your favorite food city?
A favorite food city. I'd probably have to say Taipei. And I will caveat with I haven't been to nearly as many food destinations around the world as I wish I have. But of the ones I have been to, I think Taipei has been the most kind of eye-opening and profound. And it's more than just like the food itself. It's about like everyone's kind of mentality and the collective like fervor around the food. Like they have these super, super awesome, like epic outdoor night markets that, are around everywhere, and like the big ones happen every single night, and just the hordes and hordes of people that just congregate at these night markets and just walk around, and it's like trying different foods, for, $1 to a couple bucks, and just having like, these artisans and these like, these makers who have been like, doing one thing for, 30, 40 years, and like that huge smile on their face, and they're still doing it, after all these decades, and like just you see the joy they have, and like just sharing that passion with everyone night after night. Like, I don't know, it's crazy. Like the food itself is unbelievable. And a lot of it's like this, and a lot of it might be nostalgia also, because it's a lot of the food that like I grew up with as well. But what was most eye-opening is just seeing everyone's kind of mentality towards the food and how like integral food was to the culture. It's pretty cool. But like they have stuff like I think Taiwanese food is like on the cusp of like being kind of that next kind of trendy Asian cuisine. But there's things over there that like I don't think would ever fly here. Like they have you ever been to Taipei or Taiwan?
I haven't. No, it's on the list.
But they have this thing called owamiswa, which is like a super dank, super murky oyster stew, and it's like I can't even do the color of it justice with words, but it's just like super gray and viscous and thick and nothing that you would ever think to want to put in your mouth, but it's so good. It's so good.
Interesting. All right. Yeah. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, but I'd probably say Taipei.
I have a food rule that I try anything twice, so I'm in.
That's a great rule.
Yeah, the first time you don't know. It could have been made incorrectly or it could have been, not fresh or whatever it is. So always twice.
And because that first time it's such a shock to the system, or it can be such a shock to the system, that like you need to allow your system to like recalibrate, right? Because like you're kind of butting up against this expectation of like like durian, for example. Have you ever had durian?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, like the first time you have durian, it's traumatizing. Like you're like, how can people possibly enjoy this? Or stinky tofu, right?
Yeah.
But it's like after you kind of get acclimated and after you get over that shock factor, then like the second time, like, okay, you start to appreciate the sweetness, you start to appreciate like the subtle acid, and you start to appreciate like the crazy like undescribable fruity quality that you haven't had before. And so I think having giving yourself the opportunity to try everything twice is a very, very good rule.
Thank you. It's served me well so far. All right, last question here. Do you have a guilty food pleasure?
Ooh. I have so many. Because like along with like the really awesome regional Chinese food that I had growing up, like I also, love the hot wings from KFC. Like I could get down a 20-piece hot wing like nobody's business. But I haven't had one of those in a while. I would say the most guilty that like I find this weird pleasure from is the super unnatural nacho cheese that you get at the theater.
Oh, I love it. Me too.
And
it's so good. It's disgustingly good.
And like I pile like the jalapenos. I pile the pickled jalapenos on top, and God knows how long those jalapeno have been around. And I make little nacho sandwiches with the jalapeno inside and cheese and two chips. It's the best thing ever. People think I'm disgusting, but it's the best thing ever.
I can get down with it. I see where you're coming from, my friend. It's all good. Hansen, this was awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Can you tell people how to get in touch with you? Yeah.
You could check us out at our website at oneculturefoods.com. My personal email address is on there, so feel free to reach out for anything. Hansen, Hansen, at oneculturefoods.com, all spelled out. Also, check out our Instagram at oneculturefoods, all spelled out. We are readily accessible.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Hey guys, if you want to check out the show notes from this episode, go to wecouldmakethat.com/culture. And if you're enjoying the show and haven't left us a review on iTunes, I would love it if you could just take a minute. It doesn't take long and it helps out so much. Until next time, have a good one.